The dust swirled across the weathered porch of the Marfa Mercantile, as Martha Holden clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, staring blankly at the letter in her hand. Texas in 1885 was unforgiving to women with nothing but debts and broken dreams. At 42, Martha had buried a husband, lost a ranch, and now faced eviction from the small room behind the store where she'd spent the last 3 years of her life. "You've got till the end of the week, Martha," Mr. Peterson had told her that morning, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "New owners want the space. I'm sorry." The sun was setting low over the Davis Mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that Martha was too weary to appreciate. 3 years ago, she'd arrived in Marfa after Thomas died, leaving her with nothing but debts and memories. She'd made a life here, a small one, but it was hers working at the Mercantile, keeping the books for local businesses, mending clothes for extra money. Now even that was being taken from her. "Even in, madam." The voice startled her from her thoughts. Looking up, Martha saw a tall figure silhouetted against the sunset. As he stepped closer, his features came into focus: weathered face, kind eyes, a hat tipped respectfully in greeting. She recognized him as Yates Garrison, one of the hands from the Bridgewater Ranch outside of town. He'd come in occasionally for supplies, always polite, always with a smile that reached his eyes. "Mr. Garrison," she acknowledged, quickly folding the eviction notice and tucking it into her pocket. "Just dropped by to pick up some things for the ranch," he said, gesturing to the store behind her. "Everything all right with you today? You seem troubled." Martha forced a smile. "Nothing worth mentioning. Life has its challenges, that's all." Yates nodded, understanding in his eyes. He was younger than her, perhaps in his mid-30s, with streaks of silver just beginning to show at his temples. "That it does, Mrs. Holden. That it does." As he tipped his hat again and moved past her into the store, Martha felt a strange pang in her chest. There had been a time when a man like Yates Garrison might have made her heart flutter, but those days were long gone. She was too old for such foolishness now. Too old and too tired. Later that evening, as Martha packed her meager belongings into a worn trunk, a knock came at her door. Opening it, she found Yates Garrison standing there, hat in hand. "Mr. Garrison, did you forget something at the store?" "No, madam. I heard about your situation. Word travels fast in Marfa." Martha stiffened. "I don't need charity, Mr. Garrison." "Not offering any, madam. But the Bridgewater Ranch needs a housekeeper, and Mrs. Bridgewater specifically asked me to see if you'd be interested. Room and board included, plus wages." Martha hesitated, suspicion creeping into her mind. Why would Mrs. Bridgewater send you to ask me this at night instead of approaching me herself? Yates shifted uncomfortably. "Truth is, Mrs. Bridgewater's been gone 3 months now. Mr. Bridgewater passed last year, and their daughter Alina's been running the place. She's overwhelmed, what with the ranch and her 2 young ones. She needs help, and she remembered how well you kept the books for her father once." Martha sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Garrison, but I've had my fill of ranch life. I've been thinking of heading east, maybe to my cousin in Dallas. With all due respect, Mrs. Holden, the position is good. The ranch is thriving, the pay is fair, and Alina's a kind employer." Martha studied his face, looking for deceit or pity but finding only sincerity. "I'll consider it." "Thank you." After he left, Martha sat on her bed, considering her options. Dallas seemed so far away, and her cousin had only reluctantly offered her a place to stay. Starting over in a new city at her age seemed overwhelming. The ranch position, though a step backward in some ways, offered security and familiarity. Morning came with clarity. Martha packed her trunk and arranged for it to be delivered to the Bridgewater Ranch. By noon, She was seated beside Yates in a wagon heading out of town. "I still don't understand why you're the one escorting me," Martha said as they left Marfa behind. "Surely you have more important duties." Yates kept his eyes on the road. "Eleanor trusts me. I've been foreman at Bridgewater for 8 years now. Besides, the ranch hands respect you more if they see the foreman showing respect first." They traveled in companionable silence, the landscape of the Trans-Pecos region stretching around them vast, beautiful, and unforgiving. Martha found herself studying Yates from time to time, noting the care with which he handled the horses, the way his hands seemed both strong and gentle on the reins. The Bridgewater Ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a sprawling property with a large main house, bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the pastures, and in the distance, cowboys worked the herd. Eleanor Bridgewater greeted them on the porch, her 2 children, a boy of about 7 and a girl, perhaps 5, clinging to her skirts. She was a handsome woman in her late 20s, with a weary smile that brightened when she saw Martha. "Mrs. Holden, I'm so glad you accepted." "Please come in, Yates. Would you bring Mrs. Holden's things to the east bedroom? Children, say hello to Mrs. Holden." The children murmured shy greetings as Martha was ushered inside. The house was beautiful but showed signs of neglect: dusty surfaces, books and toys scattered about, papers piled on what was once a fine writing desk. "I apologize for the state of things," Eleanor said, noticing Martha's gaze. "Since Mother passed, I've been trying to manage the books, the children, and oversee the ranch. Something had to give, and unfortunately, it was the house." "That's what I'm here for," Martha replied with a warm smile. "You've got enough on your shoulders." Over the next few weeks, Martha fell into a comfortable routine. She cleaned and organized the house, prepared meals, looked after the children when Eleanor was busy, and gradually took over the ranch's bookkeeping. The work was hard but satisfying. Eleanor was kind and appreciative. The children warmed to her quickly, and the cowboys treated her with respect. Yates Garrison was a frequent visitor to the main house, consulting with Eleanor about ranch business, bringing reports and requests. Martha often found herself watching him from the corner of her eye, appreciating his straightforward manner and quiet competence. One evening, after the children were in bed and Eleanor had retired early with a headache, Martha sat on the front porch, enjoying the cool night air. The sound of footsteps made her look up to see Yates approaching. "Evening, Mrs. Holden. Mind if I join you?" "Not at all, Mr. Garrison. And please call me Martha. Mrs. Holden makes me feel ancient." He smiled as he settled into the chair beside her. "Then I insist you call me Yates." "Mr. Garrison makes me sound like my father." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, looking out at the stars that blanketed the Texas sky. "How are you finding ranch life again?" Yates finally asked. Martha considered the question. "Better than I expected. It's good to be useful again." "You were always useful, Martha, even in town." She shook her head. "I was surviving, not living. There's a difference." Yates nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that distinction all too well." Martha found herself curious. "Have you always been a rancher?" "No," he replied, his voice soft with memory. "I was a soldier once, fought for the Union in the war. After it ended, I couldn't go back home to Pennsylvania, too many ghosts. Drifted west, worked various ranches until I found Bridgewater. And you've been here ever since?" 8 years now. "Mr. Bridgewater was a good man, gave me a chance when others might not have. I owe it to his memory to see his daughter and this ranch succeed." Martha studied his profile in the moonlight. "That's admirable." "Not really, just keeping a promise." He turned to face her. "What about you?" "What brought you to Marfa originally?" Martha sighed, the memories both bitter and sweet. My husband Thomas had dreams of ranching in Texas. We sold everything we had in Missouri and came here when I was 35. He bought land, cattle, but he wasn't cut out for it. The drought of '78 nearly ruined us. Then Thomas took sick in '82 and died. I tried to keep the ranch going, but it's a hard life without the right help, Yates finished for her. Yes, I lost the ranch to creditors, moved to town, did what I could to survive. Yates was quiet for a moment. You're a remarkable woman, Martha Holden. Martha laughed softly. I'm a woman who's seen too many years and too many hardships. You've lived, that's all, same as anyone. They talked late into the night, sharing stories and thoughts in a way Martha hadn't done with anyone in years. When she finally went to bed, her mind was filled with the image of Yates's smile and the sound of his voice. The spring of 1885 turned to summer, and life at the Bridgewater Ranch settled into a pleasant rhythm. Martha found herself increasingly at ease with her role there. Eleanor had come to rely on her not just as a housekeeper, but as a confidante and advisor, often seeking her counsel on matters beyond household affairs. The children, William and Sarah, had taken to calling her Aunt Martha, trailing after her as she went about her duties and begging for stories in the evenings. Martha, who had never had children of her own, found their affection both surprising and deeply touching. But it was her evolving relationship with Yates that most unsettled and intrigued her. Their evening conversations on the porch had become a regular occurrence, sometimes with Eleanor or the children, but often just the two of them, talking long after the household had gone to sleep. Martha learned about Yates's childhood in Pennsylvania, his 3 brothers who had also fought in the war, 2 of whom never returned, his brief marriage to a young woman who had died in childbirth, along with their infant son. He spoke of his years of wandering after the war, the odd jobs and cattle drives, the slow healing of old wounds, both physical and emotional. In turn, she told him about growing up in Missouri, her parents' small farm, meeting Thomas when she was 22, their childless marriage that had nonetheless been companionable and kind. She shared the dreams they'd had for Texas, the crushing disappointments, the struggle to keep going after Thomas died. One hot July evening, as they sat watching heat lightning flicker in the distance, Yates turned to her with an uncharacteristically serious expression. "May I ask you something personal, Martha?" She nodded, curious. "You ever think about marrying again?" The question caught her off guard. No, I'm 42, Yates. That time in my life is past." He frowned slightly. 42 isn't ancient, Martha. Many women remarry at your age or older. Perhaps, but who would want a woman with no fortune, no land, nothing to bring to a marriage but herself, and not even a young, beautiful self at that? Yates's expression grew troubled. "You undervalue yourself. You're intelligent, capable, kind. Any man would be fortunate to have such qualities in a wife." Martha felt a strange fluttering in her chest. "That's kind of you to say, but I've made my peace with being alone. After losing everything, I've learned not to hope for too much." Yates fell silent, his eyes returning to the distant lightning. Martha couldn't help wondering what had prompted his question, but she was afraid to ask. The next day brought a welcome break in the summer heat. Eleanor decided to organize a picnic by the creek that ran through the eastern edge of the property. The entire household participated: Eleanor and the children, Martha, Yates, and several of the ranch hands who weren't needed with the cattle that day. It was a joyful afternoon. The children splashed in the shallow creek while the adults talked and laughed, sharing food and stories. Martha found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't for years, even joining in when Eleanor suggested a game of horseshoes. "I haven't played since I was a girl," Martha protested, but allowed Yates to show her the proper stance and throw. His hands were warm and steady on her shoulders as he positioned her, his voice low and encouraging in her ear. When her horseshoe landed neatly around the stake, she turned to him with a delighted laugh, momentarily forgetting herself in the simple pleasure of the game. Later, as the party began to disperse back to the ranch, Yates offered to help Martha gather the remaining picnic items. "You seemed happy today," he observed as they folded the blanket. "I was," she admitted. "It's been a long time since I just played." Yates smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "You should do it more often. You have a beautiful laugh." Martha felt herself blushing like a schoolgirl. "Don't be ridiculous, Yates. I'm being entirely serious," he replied, his eyes holding hers. "Martha, Aunt Martha," Sarah's voice interrupted as the little girl came running back. "Can I help carry something? Mama says I'm big enough now." The moment broken, Martha turned to Sarah with a smile. "Of course you are. Here, you can carry this basket. It's very important because it has the leftover pie." As they walked back to the ranch, Martha was acutely aware of Yates beside her, wondering what he had been about to say. August brought scorching heat and the threat of drought. The ranch hands worked tirelessly to move cattle between pastures, ensuring they had access to water. Alina spent long hours conferring with Yates and the other senior hands, worry etching lines around her eyes. Martha did what she could to support the household, ensuring meals were ready whenever the workers returned, keeping the children occupied and out of the way, managing household supplies with careful economy. She also took on more of the ranch's bookkeeping, freeing Alina to focus on the immediate crisis. One particularly hot afternoon, Martha was reviewing the accounts in the study when Alina entered, looking exhausted. "How bad is it?" Martha asked, setting aside her pen. Alina sank into a chair. "Not as bad as 78, thankfully. Yates thinks if we can make it another month, we'll see rain. But we're going to have to sell some cattle earlier than planned to reduce the strain on the water supplies." Martha nodded. "The books can handle that. We have enough reserve to get through until the spring sales if needed." Alina smiled gratefully. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Martha. You've brought order back to this house and to me." "It's nothing," Martha demurred. "It's everything," Alina corrected. "And not just the practical help. You've become, well, almost like the mother I lost. I value your wisdom, your steadiness." Martha was touched by the young woman's words. "Thank you. That means a great deal to me." Alina hesitated, then continued. "I've noticed. Forgive me if I'm overstepping, but I've noticed that you and Yates have grown close." Martha felt heat rising to her cheeks. "We're friends, that's all." "Are you certain that's all he wants?" Alina asked gently. "Because I've known Yates for many years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." "I'm too old for that kind of nonsense," Martha protested weakly. Alina laughed. "Nonsense? Is that what we're calling love these days?" "Love? Alina, be sensible. I'm 42. Yates is 37, Alina supplied. "Hardly a scandalous difference. And age has nothing to do with the heart, Martha. Surely you know that." Before Martha could respond, they heard the pounding of hooves in the yard. Alina rose quickly and went to the window. "It's Yates, and he's riding hard. Something's wrong." They hurried outside to find Yates dismounting, his face grim with urgency. "Fire," he announced tersely. "Lightning strike in the north pasture. It's spreading fast." Alina paled. "How bad?" "Bad enough. I've sent riders to alert the neighboring ranches. We need every man we can get." The next hours were a blur of activity. Martha organized the household, preparing food and medical supplies, filling every available container with water. Alina locked the children in the main house with strict instructions not to leave, then rode out with several ranch hands to help move cattle away from the fire's path. As night fell, Martha stood on the porch, watching the distant orange glow on the horizon with a sick feeling in her stomach. She had experienced range fires before, during her time with Thomas, and knew their devastating potential. It was nearly midnight when the first riders returned, exhausted men with soot-blackened faces and occasional burns that Martha treated with salve and bandages. They reported that the fire had been contained to the north pasture, but had consumed much of the grass there. Some cattle had been lost, but most were safe. Yates and Alina were among the last to return, both so coated in ash and dirt that they were barely recognizable. "Get cleaned up," Martha ordered them. "Food's waiting in the kitchen when you're ready." Later, as she served them stew and coffee, Martha listened to their subdued conversation about the fire, the damage, the work that would be needed in the coming days. Their voices were weary, but relieved it could have been much worse. When Alina finally retired, Yates remained at the table, cradling his coffee cup in hands that were reddened and blistered from fighting the flames. "Let me see those hands," Martha said, taking the medical kit she had kept ready. Yates complied without protest, too tired to argue. Martha gently cleaned the burns and applied salve, wrapping his hands in soft bandages. "You should have been more careful," she scolded softly. "Had more important things to worry about than my hands," he replied with a faint smile. "Your hands are your livelihood, Yates Garrison. Don't take them for granted." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "You were worried about me." It wasn't a question, but Martha answered anyway. "Of course I was. I worry about everyone here. But especially me." The hint of hope in his voice was unmistakable. Martha focused on tying off the bandage. "Don't read too much into it. You're important to this ranch. And to you." She looked up then, meeting his eyes. "Yes, Yates, you've become important to me." The admission hung in the air between them, fraught with unspoken meaning. "Martha," Yates began, his voice low and serious. "I need to tell you something." The sound of running footsteps interrupted them as William appeared in the doorway, his face panicked. "Mr. Garrison, Sarah's got a terrible cough, and she can't breathe right. Mama sent me to fetch you and Aunt Martha." They hurried to the children's bedroom, where Alina was holding Sarah, whose breathing was indeed labored and wheezy. "It's the smoke," Yates said immediately. "She must have breathed too much when we were moving the cattle away from the house." Martha took the child from Alina. "Honey, the coughing helps clear your lungs, even though it hurts. William, fetch me a pot of water to boil and the jar of eucalyptus oil from my room." The next hours were spent tending to Sarah, creating steam with eucalyptus for her to breathe, keeping her upright to ease her breathing. By dawn, the child's breathing had improved significantly, though she remained pale and weak. "You should both rest," Martha told Alina and Yates as morning light filled the room. "I'll stay with Sarah." Alina hesitated. "Are you sure? You've been up all night as well." "I'm fine." "Go rest. You'll need your strength for everything that needs to be done today." Reluctantly, Alina went to her room. Yates lingered, watching Martha as she gently wiped Sarah's forehead with a cool cloth. "You're good with her," he said softly. Martha smiled down at the sleeping child. "I always wanted children. It never happened for Thomas and me." "There's still time," Yates said, his voice barely above a whisper. Martha looked up at him, startled. "What did you say?" But Yates just shook his head. "Nothing. Get some rest yourself if you can. I'll send one of the women from the bunkhouse to relieve you in a few hours." As he left, Martha found herself wondering once again what Yates had been trying to tell her, and why he seemed unable to finish the conversation. The aftermath of the fire brought weeks of hard work. Fences needed repair, cattle had to be moved to undamaged pastures, and the ranch's finances required careful management to account for the losses. Everyone worked longer hours, including Martha, who took on additional responsibilities to free Alina for more pressing matters. September arrived with blessed rain, easing the immediate concerns about drought. The land began to recover, green shoots appearing in the blackened pasture. The pace of work gradually returned to normal, and with it, the evening conversations on the porch resumed. One such evening in late September, Martha sat with Alina, discussing plans for the children's education. "I think it's time William had regular schooling," Alina was saying. "He's nearly 8, and though I've taught him what I can, he needs more." "There's a good school in Marfa," Martha suggested. "He could board there during the week, come home on weekends. Sarah will be ready in another year or so as well." Alina nodded thoughtfully. "I hate to have him away, but you're right, and speaking of changes—" She hesitated, then continued. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something. My father's cousin in Austin has invited me to bring the children for an extended visit. His health is failing, and he wants to meet William and Sarah while he still can." Martha nodded. "Of course you should go. When were you thinking?" "Next month, perhaps staying through Christmas, but I'm concerned about leaving the ranch." "Yates can manage the ranch operations," Martha assured her, "and I can handle the household and books." Alina smiled, relief evident in her face. "That's exactly what Yates said you'd say." "Thank you, Martha." The conversation shifted to preparations for the journey, but Martha's mind lingered on the prospect of several months at the ranch without Alina and the children. The house would seem empty without them, but she would have more time alone with Yates. The thought brought both anticipation and anxiety. Since the night of the fire, there had been a new tension between them, a sense of something unresolved. Their conversations remained friendly, but more guarded, as if they were both afraid to venture into deeper waters. 2 weeks later, Alina and the children departed for Austin, leaving Martha and Yates effectively in charge of the ranch. The first few days passed in a flurry of activity as they adjusted to their new responsibilities. Martha found herself working closely with Yates on ranch business, reviewing accounts and discussing decisions that would normally have gone through Alina. One evening, as they finished discussing the next cattle sale, Yates leaned back in his chair with a sigh. "I don't know how Alina manages all this and 2 children. You're a godsend, Martha." Martha smiled, gathering the papers into neat stacks. "It's no hardship. I enjoy the work, actually." "Still," Yates persisted, "we should celebrate a successful first week. How about a ride tomorrow? There's a spot on the western edge of the property I'd like to show you. We could pack a lunch, make a day of it." Martha hesitated only briefly before nodding. "That sounds lovely. I haven't been riding for pleasure in years." The next day dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn morning. Yates had the horses saddled and waiting when Martha emerged from the house, dressed in her serviceable riding skirt and jacket. He helped her mount with a gentle hand at her waist that lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary. They rode west across the ranch, Yates pointing out features of the land, sharing stories of his years working there. Martha found herself relaxing in the saddle, enjoying the rhythm of the horse beneath her and the company beside her. The spot Yates had spoken of was a small plateau overlooking a valley where the Bridgewater cattle grazed. A lone oak tree provided shade, and a small spring bubbled nearby, creating a patch of lush grass. "It's beautiful," Martha said as they dismounted. "How did you find this place?" "Accidentally, during my first year here. I was chasing strays and got a bit lost. Ended up here at sunset and thought it was the most peaceful place I'd ever seen." They spread a blanket beneath the oak and unpacked the lunch Martha had prepared: fried chicken, biscuits, apple pie, and a jug of cool cider. They ate with the healthy appetite of those who had ridden far, talking and laughing as they enjoyed the food and the view. After they had finished, Yates leaned back against the oak tree, studying Martha with a thoughtful expression. "What is it?" she asked, self-conscious under his gaze. "You look different out here," he replied. "More alive somehow." Martha smoothed her skirt, uncertain how to respond. "The fresh air does everyone good. It's not just that. You've changed since coming to the ranch, Martha. You smile more, laugh more freely." "I suppose I've found my place again," she admitted. "After Thomas died, I felt adrift. The ranch has given me purpose." Yates nodded slowly. "Purpose is important, but so is happiness. They can be the same thing." "Not always." He sat forward, his expression serious. "Martha, there's something I've been trying to tell you for months now, and I keep getting interrupted or losing my nerve." Martha's heart began to beat faster. "What is it, Yates?" He took a deep breath. "I care for you, Martha. More than as a friend, more than as a colleague. I find myself thinking about you constantly, wanting to be near you, wanting to make you smile. I know there are reasons you might not feel the same, my position, your past, the difference in our ages, but I needed you to know how I feel." Martha sat very still, overwhelmed by his words. "Yates, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now. Just think about it. Think about whether there might be a chance for us to be more than what we are." The ride back to the ranch was quieter, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the house, Yates helped Martha dismount, his hands strong and sure. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "Thank you for listening," he replied, his eyes searching hers. That night, Martha lay awake for hours, thinking about Yates's declaration. She couldn't deny that she had developed feelings for him, feelings she had tried to dismiss as inappropriate or impractical. But hearing that he returned those feelings had shattered her carefully constructed barriers. Could she allow herself to love again at her age? To risk her heart when she had already lost so much? And what about the practical considerations? She worked for the ranch, lived in the main house. If things went wrong between her and Yates, where would that leave her? Yet the thought of rejecting him, of continuing as they were with this new knowledge between them, seemed equally impossible. The truth was, Martha was afraid not of Yates, but of her own capacity for hope and disappointment. The next morning, Martha rose early and went about her duties with determined focus, avoiding the places Yates was likely to be. She needed time to think, to make sense of her tangled emotions. But avoidance proved impossible on a ranch the size of Bridgewater. By mid-afternoon, she encountered Yates coming from the barn as she returned from the henhouse with a basket of eggs. "Martha," he acknowledged with a nod, his voice carefully neutral. "Yates." She stopped, clutching the basket like a shield. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday." His expression gave nothing away. And Martha took a deep breath. "I'm flattered, truly, and I won't pretend I don't have feelings for you as well, but I'm too old to start over, Yates, to build a new life, a new relationship. I've lost everything once before. I don't think I could bear to do it again." Yates stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. "You're not too old, Martha. We're just beginning. Everything that came before your marriage, my wandering years, those were preparations for now, for us finding each other." "That's a romantic notion," Martha said, her voice wavering slightly. "But romance fades, Yates. What then? Then we have partnership, friendship, mutual respect, all the things we already share, Martha." He reached out, gently taking the basket from her hands and setting it aside. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer. Just don't dismiss the possibility without truly considering it." Before she could respond, one of the ranch hands came running toward them. "Mr. Garrison, trouble with the North Herd rustlers, looks like." The moment broken, Yates immediately switched to his role as foreman. "Get the men, we'll ride out right away." He turned back to Martha. "We'll finish this conversation later." For 3 days, Yates and most of the ranch hands were gone, tracking the rustlers and recovering the stolen cattle. Martha moved through her duties mechanically, her mind constantly returning to their unfinished conversation and the decision that awaited her. On the evening of the third day, the men returned, tired but successful. They had recovered most of the cattle and turned the rustlers over to the sheriff in Marfa. Martha served them a hearty meal, exchanging only brief, professional words with Yates, who looked exhausted but satisfied with the outcome. After the men had eaten and dispersed, Yates lingered in the kitchen as Martha cleaned up. "We need to finish our conversation," he said quietly. Martha nodded, drying her hands on a towel. "Yes, we do. But not tonight, Yates. You're dead on your feet. Tomorrow, then." It wasn't a question. "Tomorrow," she agreed. The next day was Sunday, a day of lighter duties on the ranch. After the morning meal, Yates suggested they walk to the small grove of trees near the creek, a place visible from the house but private enough for conversation. As they walked side by side, Martha gathered her thoughts, trying to find the right words for what she needed to say. "I've had time to think while you were gone," she began, "about what you said about us." Yates remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I'm afraid, Yates. Not of you, but of what might happen. I built a life with Thomas, and when I lost him, I lost everything else too. I've spent the last 3 years rebuilding, finding stability. The thought of risking that. What if you're not risking it, but securing it?" Yates countered gently. "Martha, I can't promise that life won't bring more hardships, no one can, but I can promise that you wouldn't face them alone." They reached the grove and stopped beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree. Martha turned to face him, studying the face that had become so dear to her. "What exactly are you proposing, Yates?" "Marriage," he said simply. "A life together, here at Bridgewater if Alina agrees, or elsewhere if she doesn't. I have savings, enough to buy a small place of our own if needed." "You've thought this through," Martha said, surprised by his practical considerations. "I've thought of little else for months," Yates admitted. "I'm not a young man acting on impulse, Martha. I know what I want, and it's you, your wisdom, your strength, your gentle heart." "The question is, what do you want?" Martha looked away, out across the creek to the pastures beyond. "I want peace, security, purpose." "And love?" Yates asked softly. "Do you want love, Martha?" She turned back to him, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, God help me, I do want love. I thought that part of my life was over, but you've awakened something I thought was dead." Yates stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Then give us a chance, Martha. Not a promise, not yet, just a chance to see if what we feel can grow into something lasting." Martha looked down at their joined hands, his large and weathered, hers smaller but equally marked by years of work. There was something right about the sight, something that spoke of partnership and shared burden. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A chance." The smile that broke across Yates's face was like sunrise. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Martha hesitated only a moment before responding, her hand rising to his cheek as the kiss deepened. When they parted, both were breathless and a little stunned by the intensity of the moment. "Well," Martha said, trying to regain her composure. "That was just the beginning," Yates finished, his eyes alight with joy and promise. The weeks that followed were a time of cautious exploration for Martha and Yates. They continued their duties at the ranch, maintaining professional behavior when others were present. But in the evenings, they would walk together, talk for hours on the porch, or simply sit in companionable silence, reading by the fire. Yates courted her with a gentle persistence that Martha found both amusing and touching. He brought her wildflowers picked during his rides across the ranch, carved a beautiful hairpin from a piece of antler, read poetry to her in the evenings. Small gestures, meaningful because they were given with such sincerity. Martha found herself blossoming under his attention, rediscovering parts of herself that had been dormant for years. She took more care with her appearance, began wearing her hair in a softer style, even unpacked the few pieces of jewelry she had kept from happier times. Letters from Alina reported that the children were thriving in Austin, though they missed the ranch and asked frequently about Aunt Martha and Mr. Yates. Alina planned to return after Christmas, perhaps in early January if the weather permitted travel. As November drew to a close, Martha and Yates began preparations for a quiet Christmas at the ranch. The house was cleaned from top to bottom, pine boughs and red berries arranged on mantels and tables, special ingredients ordered from Martha for holiday baking. On the first Sunday of December, Yates surprised Martha by appearing at breakfast in his best suit, freshly shaven and clearly nervous about something. "I thought we might attend church in Marfa today," he explained. "If you'd like to, that is." Martha, touched by the suggestion, quickly agreed. "I'd like that very much. Give me half an hour to change." The small church in Marfa was filled with familiar faces, people Martha had known during her years in town. There were curious glances and whispered comments as she entered with Yates, but most greeted them warmly. After the service, several people approached to inquire after Alina and the children, and to welcome Martha back to town, if only for a visit. As they prepared to leave, Martha was stopped by Mrs. Peterson, the wife of the mercantile owner who had evicted her months before. "Martha Holden, look at you. Working at the Bridgewater Ranch certainly agrees with you. You look 10 years younger," Martha smiled, accepting the backhanded compliment with grace. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. Life at the ranch keeps me busy, but I enjoy the work." Mrs. Peterson's eyes darted to Yates, who was speaking with the minister nearby. "And I see you found companionship as well. Mr. Garrison is highly respected in these parts." "Yes, he is," Martha replied, unwilling to fuel town gossip by elaborating. Later, as they drove the wagon back to the ranch, Martha told Yates about the encounter. He laughed, shaking his head. "Small towns never change. Are you bothered by the talk?" Martha considered the question. "I would have been once. Now, I find I care less about what others think." "That's one of the benefits of age, I suppose," Yates said. "Wisdom to know what matters." As they approached the ranch, Yates suddenly pulled the wagon to a stop at the same overlook where they had shared their first meaningful conversation months before. "Why are we stopping?" Martha asked. Yates set the brake and turned to her, taking her hands in his. "Because I have something to ask you, and I want to do it properly." Martha's heart began to race as Yates slid from the wagon seat, came around to her side, and with some difficulty due to his bad knee, knelt beside the wagon. "Martha Holden, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and warmth back into my world, and I can no longer imagine a future without you in it. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Martha's eyes as she looked down at the man kneeling before her, this good, kind man who had somehow seen past her age and scars to the woman beneath. For a moment, the old fears threatened to resurface. She was too old. It was too late. There was too much risk. "I'm too old to start over," she sighed, the words more habit than conviction now. Yates shook his head, his eyes never leaving hers. "We're just beginning, Martha. The best part of our lives is still ahead of us if you'll share it with me." In that moment, Martha made her choice not from fear or practicality but from the deepest part of her heart. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, Yates Garrison, I will marry you." Joy transformed his face as he rose. with a slight wince that made Martha smile sympathetically, and gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt of his feelings. When they finally continued toward the ranch, Martha felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. There would be challenges ahead, Alina's reaction to consider, practical arrangements to make, a new role to define for herself. But for the first time in a long time, she was looking toward the future with hope instead of trepidation. They decided to wait until Alina's return to announce their engagement officially, though both were certain she would approve. In the meantime, they continued their duties at the ranch while making quiet plans for their future. Christmas at Bridgewater was a simple but joyful affair. Martha and Yates exchanged modest gifts. She gave him a fine new leather journal, knowing he liked to record his thoughts. He presented her with a delicate silver brooch he had commissioned from a silversmith in Marfa. They shared a special dinner by candlelight, then sat before the fire, talking of Christmases past and those to come. New Year's Day of 1886 brought a telegram from Alina she and the children would return on January 10th. The news sent Martha and Yates into a flurry of preparation, making sure the house was immaculate and everything in perfect order for the family's return. The day of Alina's arrival, Martha found herself unexpectedly nervous. What if Alina disapproved of their relationship? What if she felt Martha had somehow betrayed her trust? The questions nagged at her as she prepared Alina's favorite dinner and made sure the children's rooms were ready. Yates noticed her anxiety and pulled her aside before riding out to meet the stage in Marfa. "She'll be happy for us, Martha. Alina values your happiness as much as you value hers." His confidence reassured her somewhat, but Martha couldn't help pacing as she waited for the wagon to return from town. When she finally heard the sound of wheels and children's voices, she hurried to the porch, smoothing her hair and straightening her apron. Alina descended from the wagon first, looking refreshed and somehow younger after her time away. William and Sarah tumbled out after her, immediately racing toward Martha with excited cries of "Aunt Martha, we missed you." Martha knelt to embrace them, laughing as they both tried to talk at once, telling her about their adventures in Austin and the presents they had received from their great-uncle. Alina approached more sedately, smiling at the scene. "They've talked of nothing but coming home to you for the past week," she said, embracing Martha warmly. "And I've missed you as well. The house in Austin was full of servants, but none with your touch." Over dinner, the children continued their excited recounting of their visit, while Alina shared news of Austin society and her great-uncle's improved health once he had met the children. Yates contributed stories of ranch happenings, carefully edited to exclude the fire and rustlers, focusing instead on amusing incidents and the successful winter preparations. When the children were finally sent to bed, despite vociferous protests, the adults settled in the parlor with coffee. Alina looked between Martha and Yates with a knowing smile. "So," she said, setting down her cup, "when were you planning to tell me about the change in your relationship?" Martha flushed, glancing at Yates. "Was it that obvious?" Alina laughed. "To anyone with eyes, yes. You both look happier than I've ever seen you. And I noticed the ring, Martha, though you've been careful to keep it turned inward." Instinctively, Martha touched the simple gold band Yates had given her on Christmas Eve. She had been wearing it on a chain beneath her dress, not wanting to announce their engagement before speaking with Alina. "We wanted to wait until you returned," Yates explained. "To make sure you approved." Alina's expression softened. "My approval. Yates, you've been like a brother to me since my father died, and Martha, you've become the dearest of friends. Nothing would please me more than to see you both happy together." Relief washed over Martha. "Thank you, Alina. That means the world to us. Have you set a date?" Alina asked, practical as always. Yates and Martha exchanged glances. "We thought perhaps early spring," Yates said. "A simple ceremony, nothing elaborate." "Nonsense," Alina declared. "You'll be married here at Bridgewater with all the proper festivities. The ranch owes you both too much to let this occasion pass without celebration." And so it was decided. The wedding would take place in April, when the weather was mild and the ranch less busy. Martha would continue her duties until then, though Alina insisted on hiring additional help to ease her burden as the wedding approached. Word of the engagement spread quickly through the county. Martha received letters of congratulation from acquaintances in Marfa, and even a somewhat grudging good wish from Mrs. Peterson. The ranch hands, many of whom had come to respect and like Martha during her time at Bridgewater, organized their own celebration, complete with a handmade quilt as a wedding gift. As winter gave way to spring, Martha found herself caught up in a whirl of preparations she had never expected to experience at her age. Alina insisted on ordering a proper wedding dress from a dressmaker in Austin, despite Martha's protests that something simpler would suffice. "You'll be the most beautiful bride Presidio County has ever seen," Alina declared, brushing aside Martha's concerns about her age and appearance. And indeed, when Martha tried on the completed dress, an elegant creation of ivory satin and lace, far finer than anything she had ever owned, she hardly recognized the woman in the mirror. Not because the dress made her look younger, but because it highlighted a confidence and joy that transformed her. April 18, 1886, dawned clear and perfect in the Davis Mountains. The Bridgewater Ranch had been prepared for the occasion with flowers from Alina's garden, ribbons and bunting on the porch railings, and a large tent on the lawn where the wedding feast would be served. Guests began arriving mid-morning, neighboring ranchers and their families, townspeople from Marfa, even a few of Martha's distant relatives who had made the journey from Missouri. Each was welcomed by Alina and the children, while Martha remained sequestered in her room, attended by Alina's cousin who had come from Austin to serve as her matron of honor. Yates, meanwhile, was getting ready in the bunkhouse, assisted by his best man, a fellow Union veteran who had settled in El Paso and ridden 3 days to stand with his old comrade. At precisely noon, Martha stood at the entrance to the parlor, which had been transformed into a chapel for the occasion. The guests were seated, facing the fireplace where the minister waited with Yates. As the music began, a violinist from Marfa playing a traditional wedding march, Martha took a deep breath and began her walk toward the man who had given her a second chance at happiness. Yates watched her approach with undisguised adoration, his eyes never leaving hers as she moved toward him. When she reached his side, he took her hands in his, squeezing gently in reassurance. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and steady, reflecting the certainty of their commitment. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her with a tender reverence that brought tears to Martha's eyes. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, a feast under the tent, dancing to music provided by local musicians, toasts and well wishes from friends old and new. Martha moved through it all in a happy daze, scarcely believing that this joyous occasion was in her honor. As the sun began to set, Yates found her taking a moment of quiet on the porch. "Are you happy, Mrs. Garrison?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Martha replied, leaning into his embrace, "though I'm still getting used to the name." Yates chuckled. "You have time. We have time, Martha. All the time in the world." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the twilight settle over the land that had brought them together. Martha thought of the journey that had led her to this moment, the losses and struggles, the hard-won wisdom, the unexpected joy of finding love when she least expected it. "I was wrong, you know," she said softly. "About what?" "When I said I was too old to start over." "You were right all along. We were just beginning." Yates smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And we still are, my love. Every day is a new beginning with you." 2 years later, Martha Garrison stood on the porch of the small house she and Yates had built on land gifted to them by a leaner, still part of the Bridgewater Ranch, but their own home. In her arms was their greatest surprise and joy. 6-month-old Thomas Garrison, named for the husband Martha had loved and lost. The doctors in Marfa had been astonished when Martha, at 44, discovered she was expecting. Yates had been overjoyed, Martha terrified. But the pregnancy, while difficult, had proceeded safely, and Thomas had arrived healthy and strong, with his father's eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Now, watching Yates ride in from checking the cattle, their son gurgling happily in her arms, Martha felt a contentment she had once thought impossible. She had learned that age was just a number, that it was never too late for new beginnings, and that love, when it was right, could heal even the deepest wounds. As Yates dismounted and strode toward them, his face lighting up at the sight of his family, Martha smiled. This was her second chance, her new beginning, her proof that sometimes the best chapters of life came later in the story. And it was only the beginning.